Thank you so much, Zoom. So, yes, welcome to Experts of Work, this Experts of Work webinar on employee health, nutrition for a healthy mind. This is something that we've not covered before, and I'm very grateful to Mike for correcting that omission. It's for members of all three of our networks. We're recording this session you just heard, and a big welcome to you, Mike. Mike, thanks a lot for doing this. Mike's a registered nutritional therapist and health educator who currently lectures at the London-based College of Naturopathic Medicine and is also the Chief Nutritionist at Nutrable, a wellness tech company. So do send us questions and suggestions via chat throughout. You good people are always very good at that. Please put yourself on mute for now if you haven't already. Thanks very much. Mike, I know you've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to turn the floor over to you, as it were. And I think around about 2:25 p.m, perhaps we'll break and see if there's some Q&A as well as at the end.
Yeah. Okay, sounds like a plan. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you again, Richard, for the invitation to chat with you. Today we're talking about nutrition for a healthy mind, and what that really means is we're talking about nutrition for kind of a better brain, really. And when we talk about mental health, the brain is a good place to start, you know. And it's quite an important topic. I think only a few years ago, mental health wasn't on the corporate radar, and now, you know, it seems it's almost mandatory. And although it's quite common for employers to offer access to counseling and cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, we rarely hear about the role that inadequate nutrition plays in mental health problems, or indeed, you know, the power of optimum nutrition in supporting healthy brain function and cognition and emotional stability and memory function, right? The role of nutrition is a pretty big subject, and there are varying levels of understanding as well. So what I hope to do with you today is give you more of an appreciation for the role that nutrition plays in brain function. And I'm going to focus really on three key nutrition principles that, you know, if you and your employees get those principles right, most of the time you set the stage for better mental health. But first, before we dive into that, I thought I'd kind of do a level set for the room by starting this talk by answering the question, what are we made of? And the answer to that, of course, is cells. You know, it's estimated that we're made up of about 10 trillion cells in our body, but there are only about 300 different cell types. You know, we have liver cells and kidney cells and bone cells and skin cells and brain cells and on and on and on, right? And we forget often that cells don't just sit idle, right? Cells have functions to perform. You know, the liver is a good example. You know, it's a very busy organ, and of course, it's made up of a bunch of liver cells, and the liver cells do over 500 functions in the body, from making enzymes that convert fructose into fat and vice versa, or, you know, detoxifying caffeine, so that we can excrete it through our urine, and many, many others. And all of these functions that happen in the cell happen by way of chemical reaction. There are thousands of chemical reactions going on in every cell every second, right? And for these chemical reactions to work, they require these things called cofactors, right? And another word for cofactors is micronutrients, right? The vitamins and the minerals and the amino acids and the essential fatty acids. There are about 40 of these micronutrients that we call essential. And they're essential for two reasons. One, we don't make them ourselves, so we have to get them from our environment. And two, they're essential because if we're missing any one of these, we get sick and die pretty quickly, right? And so it kind of stands to reason that if we're missing any one of these, we die. That if one or perhaps several of these are in, let's say, kind of low supply, that chemistry at the cellular level might not happen as well as it could, right? It kind of makes sense, right? Optimal function requires optimal nutrition. So that begs the question, well, where do we get these micronutrients? And of course, the answer is food, right? And, you know, I did 30 years in the tech industry before realizing that it wasn't going to end very well if I kept going, trying to kill myself before I shifted into the world of wellness and medicine. And I kind of like to use this analogy. Let's say that let's say that our genes, okay, we got about 23,000 genes. And let's say those are the hardware that tell our cells what to do and how to do it. And we all know that hardware needs software to function, right? Software is, in fact, the information that enables hardware to run properly, okay? And so you can kind of look at food as being that software information that gives our cells what they need to function properly. Food is kind of the delivery mechanism that gets that information to our cells. And we can either give our cells the right information or the wrong information, right? And, you know, the foods pictured on this slide are what we call kind of energy dense food, right? There's lots of calories in this food, but they're nutrient poor, right, in terms of micronutrients. And because eating is kind of what I call a zero-sum game, right? We can only eat so much food. So the more of one food we eat, the less of another food we eat. And the more of this type of fast food and processed food we base our diet around, the more likely we are to develop micronutrient deficiencies. Actually get into a situation where we're overfed, but we're undernourished. And, you know, in the short term, that's a recipe for kind of poor, let's say, hardware function, including the brain. But in the long term, it's a recipe for chronic disease, plain and simple, okay? So let's now shift gears and get into this subject of nutrition for optimal mental health. And mental health means different things to different people, of course, but we often think of mental health around, you know, emotional health and psychological health. You know, how do we handle stress, for example, or how do we relate to others, right? But we can also think about mental health as, you know, what's our memory like? You know, are we quick to recall words when we're speaking, giving a presentation or in a meeting? You know, can we concentrate when we need to, right? All of these things are part of good mental health, right? Now, from a nutrition standpoint, it's really about supporting the brain and the central nervous system. And of course, they don't work in isolation, right? We need a healthy digestive system to absorb the nutrients. We need a healthy cardiovascular system to pump those nutrients to our brain and the rest of our body. We need balanced hormone levels and many other things. But when all those things are firing on all cylinders, it's kind of happy days. But when not, symptoms can emerge, right? And believe it or not, every single one of these symptoms on this chart have links in the scientific literature to inadequate nutrition, all right? And, you know, not surprisingly, the brain substantial nutritional requirements. You know, believe it or not, the brain accounts for only about 2% of our body weight, but it requires more than 20% of our total energy and nutritional needs, okay? So it's a very, let's say, hungry consumer of nutrition in the body, all right? And the first nutrient that it needs is oxygen. And we don't often think of oxygen as, but it's probably the most important because, you know, without oxygen, the brain cells die pretty quickly, right? And glucose, of course. Glucose is the primary, let's say, fuel for our brain and our nervous system. And our brain needs a very steady supply of these two, oxygen and glucose. But, you know, running down the list, we need protein and the acids that protein provide. You know, we need amino acids to build things in the body, including like neurotransmitters that allow us to think, right? We need essential fatty acids that is made up of mostly fat, right? You could call fatheads, in fact. We need minerals like calcium and magnesium and zinc. You know, these are critical minerals that are needed for electrical signaling between nerve cells or neurons, and you know, also the release of neurotransmitters and the relaxation of those neurotransmitters, right? Richard, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. I just got a signal that my mic changed, so wanted to check. Yeah, so we need these minerals. We also need vitamins like B vitamins, right? B vitamins are vital to our brain chemistry. Without enough B vitamins, we can't make these neurotransmitters like dopamine that you may have heard of, and GABA and serotonin, right? And of course, you know, we've all probably heard of the importance of vitamin D and mental health. We know that when we're low in vitamin D, you know, you may have heard of this condition called SAD, right? In the Nordic countries, when they don't get a lot of sunlight, they can't make enough vitamin D, and you know, they can get depressed, right? And in the scientific literature, low levels of vitamin D are linked to depression, okay, among other nutrients involved there. So those nutrients are all kind of good and well, right? But rather than spend our time kind of discussing how to get more of those, I thought it would be more valuable if I could empower you with 3 core principles that is right, you're on your way to better brain health, and for that matter, overall general health as well, right? And principle number 1, right at the top, is a balanced blood sugar. And this is probably the most important tenet of brain health, but also general health as well, you know? But, you know, the brain, as I said, needs a steady supply of glucose or blood sugar or blood glucose. And when I use these terms, I use them interchangeably. But excessive amounts of blood glucose or an imbalanced blood glucose is in fact linked to the top 5 killers today. We're talking about heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's and dementia. All of these diseases have links to some degree to excessive or imbalanced blood sugar. So it's a pretty important thing to cover here. But those diseases are all kind of very, let's say, downstream, you know, serious diseases. If we talk about upstream and everyday symptoms that we might experience if our blood sugar isn't quite as balanced as it used to be, we're talking about some of these symptoms. You know, maybe we get a little hangry or cranky or irritable if we haven't had a snack, or we get fatigued in the afternoon, or maybe really sleepy after lunch, or, you know, perhaps, you know, you could suffer from very painful or heavy periods, or, you know, you get a little dizzy when you stand up too quickly. All of these are signs that our blood sugar isn't as balanced and managed as perhaps it used to be, okay? And a balanced blood glucose is so important in the body that we've evolved a very sophisticated way to manage and to maintain our blood sugar. So I want to actually take a little time and explain that process to you, okay? We get glucose from food, and when we eat, our blood sugar rises, and glucose in the blood is not a good thing, right? In fact, too much glucose in the blood is toxic to our cells. And so we need to get glucose out of the blood and into the cells where our cells can use it to make energy. And for that to happen, we need a hormone called insulin. Brain detects the blood glucose. It will trigger the release of insulin. And if our cells are responding to insulin, the cells will open up and take that glucose in, and our blood sugar goes down. And we eat again, and our blood sugar goes up, and we make a little more in, and our cells respond, take in the glucose, and we have this nice kind of curve. And that's a perfectly normal pattern, right? But when we eat in a way that produces dramatic spikes in our blood sugar, right? We're talking about refined carbohydrates and things made of flour, of course, sugar and sugary foods and cakes and biscuits, even certain fruits like, very ripe bananas, or even fruit juice. Right? How many people have sat down and eaten 3 oranges back to back? It's kind of difficult. Right? Nature has a way of wrapping up sugar in lots of fiber, so you can't get at too much of it too quickly. But when you juice it all and down the hatch, that too can drive dramatic increases in our blood sugar. And so what the brain does is try and compensate. And so it asks for loads of insulin to try and mop up this glucose. And you might think, well, what's the problem then? If the insulin's working, it can drive glucose down. The problem is insulin's a long-lasting hormone, right? And so even after our glucose levels come down to kind of baseline, insulin's still circulating in the blood, mopping up all that glucose. And it can get to the point where our blood sugar is too low. And that is actually a stressor for the brain, right? As I mentioned, this is the primary fuel, and it likes a steady supply. So too much glucose, too little glucose, and that is a bigger stressor to the brain than, say, running from a saber-toothed tiger. And the brain will respond, and it will start to, firstly, it will create stress hormones like cortisol that tell the liver to produce glucose no matter what. You don't have to eat glucose to make glucose. Your liver can get out of muscle tissue if it has to, right? But the brain will also make hunger hormones, and you become what I call a maniac looking for a Mars bar. And that's these carbohydrate cravings are, and so satisfy that by either eating a biscuit or a Mars bar or a glass of orange juice or whatever. You spike your blood sugar again, you make a ton of insulin, and it drives your blood sugar down again, and you're on what's called the blood sugar roller coaster. Okay, and it's not a nice thing for the brain to have to experience, and it can manifest as stress and anxiety, to name other symptoms. Okay, so let's quickly kind of run through how we eat to stabilize our blood sugar. Okay, and it starts by following what's called a low GL way of eating. GL stands for glycemic load. Glycemic load refers to the effect that a serving of a given food has on your blood sugar. We want to eat in a way that prevents our blood sugar from spiking high. And here, protein is our best friend, okay? Making sure that you get a good amount of protein and some healthy fat at each meal is critical to blood sugar balance, okay? And why is that? Well, protein is slow to digest, okay? So it digests more slowly, and so it kind of slows the digestion and the absorption of the glucose in the meal. And so it kind of works to flatten that curve, so to speak. And so you don't get those dramatic spikes and dips that lead to some of those hangry symptoms, okay? And in terms of the carbohydrates, we want to focus on carbs that release their energy slowly. And here we're talking about fiber, okay? Fibrous vegetables, for example. And you'll see non-root vegetables. Nothing against root vegetables, but root vegetables like potatoes, these are concentrated sources of energy. They have lots of carbohydrate in them. So if we're struggling with imbalanced blood sugar, we want to kind of focus more on the vegetables that grow above ground, which have less glucose in them. and lots of fiber and lots of nutrients. Beans are also a super good high fibrous carbohydrate source that invoke a very slow glycemic response. And whole grains rather than refined grains. We want to minimize those refined grains that have had not only most of the micronutrients stripped, but most of the fiber stripped as well, right? And that comes from ultra processed food. And this comment here, don't drink your fruit. Back to that comment I said a moment ago, nature has a way of wrapping up sugar in lots of fiber, so you can't get at too much of it too quickly. When we squeeze all that sugar out and down the hatch, it can have as dramatic of an effect on blood sugar as a can of Coke, right? Even though, yes, it's natural sugars and there's some nutrients in there. We all know, orange juice is good in vitamin C, but the blood sugar impact kind of, I'm afraid, undoes a lot of the good that come from the vitamins. And the last little tip here is giving yourself some time off from eating, right? And this is an important tenet for mental health as well as overall metabolic health. The brain does its own cleansing when we're not eating. So those hours before bed are really quite important to maximizing that kind of brain's ability to clean house whilst we sleep, right? And in general, when we want to try to train our body to have more balanced blood sugar, the more we give ourselves time off each day, the more we train ourselves to be able to burn sugar when it's available or glucose when it's available and tap into our fat reserves when we are not eating. That's, after all, why we evolved this wonderful cell type called our fat cells, right? Provide a battery backup when food isn't always available, which of course it wasn't always available in our evolutionary past. Okay, so just for fun, let's kind of take a look at what boarding the blood sugar roller coaster might look like in kind of a typical work day. All right, let's say 8 a.m. We might start our day with a piece of toast, a cup of coffee, maybe a glass of juice, a continental breakfast. Needless to say, these are very glycemic foods, not a lot of protein going on there, and that's going to spike your blood sugar. So that come 10:30, no wonder you're craving a little snack. And okay, you might want to do something healthy, so you reach for a granola bar. But if you look at a lot of the store-bought granola bars, the second ingredient after oats is glucose syrup, so you spike your blood sugar again. And then come lunchtime, you're famished, and you grab a typical sandwich and maybe a packet of crisps. It might surprise you to know that a slice of bread has the blood sugar equivalent of 3.5 teaspoons of sugar. Now, that is not to say that there's that much sugar in that bread, but it's about what happens in the body when you consume that bread. And bread converts to glucose in the bloodstream. And so if you have 2 slices of bread, that's the blood sugar equivalent of 7 teaspoons of sugar, right? And if you maybe want to do one of your 5 a day as well, and you have a banana, that's another high glycemic fruit, and you are asking for an energy dip in the afternoon, and come 3 o'clock, yes please, 2 biscuits and a cup of tea, or whatever else you might need to kind of get the blood sugar up, right? So this is quite often a pretty typical day for a lot of the clients that I see. So what would it look like if you get off that roller coaster? Well, you might want to start your morning with protein. Okay, so here we've got some scrambled egg, maybe some smoked salmon, or if you're a vegetarian or vegan perhaps, or you're not into scrambled eggs, maybe you like your oat porridge. You want to add some protein and healthy fats to that. So a handful of nuts and seeds would be a good strategy, and maybe some berries for the antioxidants. And, again, 10:30 comes around, maybe reach for, a domestic piece of fruit like an apple, for example. Apples and pears, they have a lower glycemic load than, say, bananas and grapes and tropical fruits like pineapple and mango. And then again, a little bit of protein with it, a few almonds or some nuts and seeds, just to put some protein in that mix and slow down the blood sugar absorption. Lunchtime comes around, maybe we want to go for a nice colorful salad, with some healthy fats and avocado and a lean piece of chicken for protein or fish. And if you're a vegan, perhaps, some beans, some chickpeas, lentils, things like that will produce a very low glycemic response. And then come the afternoon, this is when we want to start winding back on our stimulants. And but if we do need a snack, perhaps things like, some celery sticks and hummus, that would be a good kind of protein fat source. But, it might surprise you, though, that when we do base our main meals around plenty of healthy fats and color, we find we're not interested in food in between these meals because our blood sugar is stable, right? The only time we get peckish is when our blood sugar gets too low. Okay, so that's the blood sugar principle. And I guess, Richard, before I move on to principle 2, would this be a good time to check if there are any questions to field?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's perfect timing. Thanks for letting us interrupt, as it were. There are 2 excellent questions, actually. I'll just, they're in the chat, but I'll read them out as well. So from Amy, hello, Mike. I wondered what you thought of wearables to measure blood sugar levels, such as Zoe.
Well, I mean, the continuous glucose monitors have been around for quite some time. And I think they're great, What this is a little patch that you can put on your arm, and then with an app, you can simply tap it and gauge your blood sugar. And essentially, what we're learning is that the microbiome, the bacteria that inhabit our gut, play a big role in how each individual metabolizes food and how our blood sugar responds, So for one person, we're now learning a piece of toast might have this effect on our blood sugar, and for another, it might shoot our blood sugar through the roof. Okay. And so, these wearables can be very valuable in terms of informing the individual as to the types of food that will spike their blood sugar, and then give us information to make different choices. So thumbs up to that.
Thanks, Mike. Is that something you've used, Amy?
No, I haven't, but I had a conversation with my CEO on Thursday, and he and his wife are wearing them, and he was sort of very complimentary, and he showed me how it all worked. And so yeah, I think he said that the package that he bought is £300 or something, and it includes a number of patches. But he says already, even in a week, he can sort of tell the difference. He feels different.
Yeah. I mean, Zoe has been a phenomenon. I met Tim Spector years ago when he published his first book, and he's been studying the microbiome of twins for, over a decade. And, he was asked to get involved in this company just as it was starting. And he's I have to say, I'm a lovely guy, but I'm getting sick of seeing him on YouTube. He's in every single ad is Zoe. You can do the same thing a lot more cheaply. You can buy a glucose kit. Okay, it's a little finger prick test. You just prick your finger a little bit. You can simply have your regular meal, take your blood glucose before and 2 hours after, and see where your blood sugar is.
Okay.
And then kind of say, okay, gosh, that porridge I've been eating, I thought I was doing a good thing to myself. Turns out porridge spikes the heck out of my blood sugar. Yeah. Well, what happens when I add nuts and seeds to it?
Yes, that's the interesting thing. So I think he said that he added an avocado, and it completely brought it down, which I think is just fascinating.
Yeah, healthy fats, fats. It all works to kind of slow down that absorption. So,
thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Okay. Julie, would you mind if I brought you in on this point, because it's such a good question. So as you might have seen, might not have had time to read it, but it's Julie's got a terrific question about influencing behavior change for people when the burning platform isn't immediate and logical reasoning isn't effective. But Julia, you'll put it better, obviously.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, apologies because it was a slightly personal related question, but it's I've got a 13-year-old daughter who loves sweet chocolate, and I can give all the, I have quite a healthy diet. I've actually been on Zoe myself, and so we talk a lot about nutrition and the facts. But when it's such a long way away, when you're talking about sort of diabetes and heart disease and things, and she's very slim, she's kind of saying, "Oh, it's not a problem, I'll worry about it later." And it occurred to me that actually, whether that's a 13-year-old or behavior change amongst adults, how do you do it when ration doesn't work, a reasonable argument doesn't work, and the burning platform isn't sort of straight in front of you? What have you found to be effective?
It's a tough one because kids are so unique and individual, and I feel for you. I mean, it's great if you have kids that just love vegetables and just, I mean, I don't know, can you get her involved in some of the cooking, and chopping vegetables and things, when kids touch the food and get more involved in it and what the food is that they're eating, I find they can be more likely to, to eat it, right? You can also make healthier sugary snacks, for lack of a better word. Like I make my own protein bars, which are dates and almonds and walnuts and coconut and cacao, raw cacao powder. I call them raw. They can be raw. I call them raw brownies because you put the cacao in and you blitz it all up in the food processor and mash it into a tray, if you will, and put it in the fridge, and they've got the consistency of brownies, but at least you've got minerals and healthy fats from the almonds and the walnuts and the coconut, and kids love them. Or you can get them involved and have them roll them into little balls for their lunchbox, yeah, there's a great book out, and we'll leave this one there. It's called French Kids Eat Everything. And it's it might be worth a read. It's weird. Apparently France doesn't have this problem with their kids being picky, there's got to be something they're doing, but I think it's involvement in food.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, she does eat all the vegetables. So vegetables and chocolate is her view of a balanced diet. Okay. So that's the challenge. That's some great advice. Thank you.
That's something. Color's better than beige.
Okay. Thank you. And great. If we can have the recipe for the brownie, that would be fabulous as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'll send that over to Richard.
Oh, thanks, Mike. That would be great. And I'll find that book and the link, because Nikki Maloney was also asking, are there any resources for young people? And you've given one there, which is great.
Okay, cool.
Back to you. And thanks ever so much, Julie and Amy.
Okay, yes, thank you for that. So principle number one, blood sugar, really important, not just for mental health and for kids, but also for overall metabolic health, which is pretty important for life. The second principle I've selected specifically for mental health is around healthy fat. Okay. And why is well, I mentioned that the brain is made up of mostly fat, right? But consider the type of fuel that the heart prefers. The heart prefers fat for its fuel. The heart uses a lot of energy, right? And fat is a concentrated energy source. So not to mention our hormones, right? We make about 100 hormones, and many of them are made from fat, including our sex hormones and our stress hormones. Our immune system needs fat to function. And, I talked about us being made up of 10 trillion cells. Well, just like we have skin that holds us together and all of our organs together, cells too have a skin. It's called the cell membrane, without which a cell would just be a blob of goo. And cell membranes in our body are made up of fat. And so, and if we eat unhealthy fat or not enough healthy fat, our cell membranes don't form right and our cells don't function right. So, and so what does that look like? when we don't get enough of these essential fats, it can look like symptoms. Okay, and these are just a small handful of symptoms that I've selected that are a sign that we might be lacking essential fatty acids. These are, remember, essential for life, but just things like dry skin and hair, right? Or perhaps some arthritis or joint pain. Cracked skin on the heel, it's a classic sign of not enough essential fatty acids in the diet. But also related to mental health, mood swings and depression. There are plenty of scientific papers that show the link between low levels of omega-3 and depression, right? Now, there are two essential fats that are essential, okay? And it's omega-6 and omega-3, and you've probably heard about some of these. And they're needed in the body for many things, okay? And in nature, in our ancient evolutionary past, we got about even amounts of omega-6 and omega-3 in the diet as hunter-gatherers, okay? And I want to just explain a little bit of how we use these fats in the body. So, I'm going to go a little bit into the science, but I won't go too deep here. But we use omega-6 and omega-3 fats. One way we use them is in the immune system, okay? And you may have heard of something called inflammation, right? It's at the root of most chronic disease conditions. There's some sort of inflammatory process. Now, inflammation is essential. We need inflammation if we get an infection or we get an injury or we cut ourselves and it gets infected. We need to be able to make inflammation in the body to start that healing process, to clear bacteria, damaged tissues, so that then healing can begin, all right, once inflammation stops. And we use omega-6 fatty acids to make inflammatory molecules for that process. We would die without inflammation. But we also need to turn off that inflammation so healing can begin. And for that, we need to make anti-inflammatory molecules in the body. And with that, we use omega-3 fats to make anti-inflammation. Okay, so in our past, we got even amounts of this, in our ancient past, I should say. But today, with the Western diet, it's estimated that we get 18-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3. So you can kind of just do the maths in your head. That means we have a lot of ability to make inflammation. We're really good at it, but we're not very good at turning it off. Okay, and it turns out that the brain is quite sensitive to inflammation, and which isn't something that's easily detected. You don't necessarily feel it when it's low grade under the covers, but it can manifest as some of these symptoms that I've talked about, okay? And so how do we get enough essential fatty acids, and especially omega-3? Well, the most concentrated source of omega-3 fats is in oily fish, okay? And this is an acronym that might help you remember the fish that have the most omega-3, and it's SMASH, which stands for salmon, mackerel, anchovy, sardines, and herring, okay? And we want to aim to get 2 to 4 servings of that in our diet each week to get enough omega-3 fats. But there are other sources as well, like grass-fed beef and lamb, right? And I say grass-fed because, what the animal eats determines the composition of its fat. And animals that are fed grains, like in America, they feed their cattle genetically modified soybeans and grains and wheat and things. That produces fat that is high in omega-6 because nuts and seeds and grains contain omega-6 fats. And it makes sense if the animal's diet is made up of that, the fat in that animal will be mostly omega-6. But cattle that graze on grass and clover, their fat is super high in omega-3 fat. In fact, grass-fed meat has equivalent omega-3 levels in the fat to fatty fish, right? We can also get omega-3 from nuts and seeds, particularly walnuts and flaxseed and pumpkin seeds. These are these are high sources of plant-based omega-3, but our body then has to convert that form of omega-3 into what's called EPA and DHA. And unfortunately, we don't convert these fats into EPA and DHA very effectively in the human body. We convert fats at about 1% or less than 1% conversion. So, if you're not doing fish or grass-fed meat for whatever reason, this is probably an area you want to consider supplementing if we want to support brain health. And the good news is there are now vegan omega-3. You can buy fish oil, quality matters, but you can also buy vegan omega-3 supplements that are derived from algae, which are really, I would say, essential if you're not eating these concentrated forms. Other healthy fats, the monounsaturated fats from nuts and seeds and avocado, and their cold pressed oils. With oils, unfiltered and unprocessed is much, much better. Olives are probably at the top of the list in terms of heart health and overall metabolic health. Olive oil and this essential fat in the Mediterranean seems to be the secret sauce against cardiovascular disease, and also saturated fat. Just a quick word on that. That's been demonized for decades as being the cause of heart disease, but I'm afraid the science has long been disproven in terms of that myth. But the message just hasn't got out there, sadly. Saturated fats were a part of our human diet for our entire evolution. And you just have to ask yourself, if they were so bad for us, then why is human breast milk mostly saturated fat, right? One saturated fat, by the way, that the brain just loves is coconut oil, which is over 85% saturated fat. And there is evidence that a couple of tablespoons a day of coconut oil can help reverse some of the signs of dementia, right? A good healthy fat to think about. But, a low-fat diet, if it's unhealthy fat, is probably a wise thing, okay? Ever since we've been told that we should lower the fat in our diet, we were also told in the same breath that we should shift to healthy forms of fats like the polyunsaturated fats in vegetable oil. And these come from seeds, okay, like sunflower seeds and rapeseed and cottonseed and soybeans, and whilst the fats from these seeds are healthy when they're in the seed, these cheap vegetable oils that we find in the supermarkets with yellow lids on the bottom shelf, they are highly chemically processed. They're stripped of any healthy nutrients. They add yellow coloring to make them look appetizing. They have to deodorize them so they don't smell rancid, because they are, I'm afraid, already in the bottle. And they're also especially high in omega-6 fats. And this is one of the reasons why we have this 18-to-1 ratio, because we're using these oils to cook with. And of course, any sort of packaged processed food that, is cooked in a factory is using these cheap industrial processed seed oils, and they're really quite bad for health, especially if you heat them. These omega-6 fats are very delicate fats, and they're easily damaged by light, oxygen, and heat especially. And when we do that, we essentially turn them into trans fats, which the body really doesn't know what to do with. We didn't evolve heating oils to high temperatures for long periods of time, right? So I often get asked, what about cooking? What oils do we want to cook with? And here, actually, believe it or not, we want to if we're doing any sort of frying, we want to lean towards the more saturated fats, like things like ghee or grass-fed butter or coconut oil or even lard. This is our parents used to cook with these fats that were healthy, but lard got a bad rap, right? if the animal was well fed and that lard is going to be perfectly fine to consume, and it takes heat much better than these processed vegetable oil. It doesn't get damaged. Extra virgin olive oil is probably the best all-round oil to use to cook with. It's a monounsaturated, and without getting into the science, it's a mostly saturated fat. Not completely, but mostly saturated, which means it's a much more stable fat with cooking. The polyunsaturated fats that come from the likes of walnuts and seeds, we want to reserve those for drizzling, really, right? We really shouldn't be heating those fats, okay? So yeah, that's all I'll say there. And I'll now move on to principle number 3, which is just the last principle I'm going to share with you today. And that's really striving for nutrient diversity and nutrient density in our foods, right? And I say diversity because, no one food contains all the nutrients that we need. And so the more variety of foods we consume, the wider range of micronutrients we're exposed to, right? And one of the best sources of micronutrients is vegetables and more vegetables, right? And I say a little fruit here because you've all heard of 5 a day. Well, that comes from research that showed that people that ate more fruits and vegetables than not tended to get less disease, okay? There was no actual research that pinned the number 5 on it, but there is research that shows that people that ate 7 fruits and veg a day got even less disease than 3. But our government chose 5 because they figured it was an easier goal to achieve, right? Sadly, this country averages about 3 a day. But, speaking truth, 7 a day is better. And people who eat 10 a day, disease almost falls off a cliff. But if you are eating 7 servings of fruit and veg a day, the ratio of veg to fruit is about 5-2, because fruit tends to have more sugar in it. And so 5 veg, 2 fruit, and you're good. And really, nutrients are color-coded. And so if you kind of aim towards eating through the rainbow, it's a good kind of rule of thumb, and this is where maybe kids can get involved in this as well. Look to eating different colors in the rainbow every day or every couple of days if you can, certainly every week. We've found that it's the colorful pigments in fruits and vegetables and beans and things. These are what we call phytochemicals or phytonutrients. They're protective to the plant, and it turns out these phytochemicals, phyto means plant, they're also protective for humans. And so the more of these colorful pigments we get into our diet, the healthier our gut, and the healthier we are. And of course, they are anti-inflammatory, and that's a good thing for our brain health as well. We want to avoid ultra-processed food, of course, or eat as little of it as we can. And, choosing color over beige, a lot of the processed food is beige in color. And so, look to the rainbow as opposed to the beige. Nuts and seeds and beans, these are highly nutrient-dense proteins and healthy fats that are just super nutrient-dense. I mean, the studies show that people who eat a handful of nuts and seeds 3 times a week get less disease, right? Plain and simple. Eggs are another super nutrient dense food. In fact, I made a film on organic egg production and learned that the egg is the closest thing to the perfect food that exists on the planet, right? The only 2 micronutrients that aren't in eggs are vitamin C and fiber. But other than that, they contain almost every nutrient, provided the chicken was well fed, of course, because what's in the egg had to come from what the chicken ate, okay? So, and the yolks, of course, we used to see these days where, people were having egg white omelets thinking it's the heart healthy option. that is long been disproven, and most of the nutrients in eggs are in the yolk. So when people have egg whites, okay, they're getting protein, but they're missing out most of the golden power of an egg. Organ meats, maybe controversial, used to be a standard on the plate at least once a week, a couple of generations back. Organ meats are the most nutrient dense foods that there are. Liver, believe it or not, gram for gram, has the most nutrients of any food. Okay, obviously, what that animal ate is important. It doesn't go down so well with vegans, but as far as nutrient density and diversity, if you are a fan of liver and you haven't had it in a while, I'd say bring it back into the meal if you consume meat. And also, with kids, if they don't like organ meat, you can slip it into like mince, even like 10-15% of the mince as liver, and you're going to massively amp up the micronutrient content of that burger or mince. And the last point here is organics, right? Wherever possible. We know that apart from consuming fewer pesticides, which is a good thing, organic produce has more micronutrients in it, plain and simple, right? I've included a slide with some supplements that have been shown to be particularly beneficial for mental health. This is just a few of them. Ginkgo biloba is native to China, and it's an extract from the leaf, and it increases circulation to the brain. So some of you may have heard of it. Can boost brain function. L-theanine, this is an amino acid found in black tea, and in a supplement form, it actually improves relaxation whilst also increasing focus. And I used to give this to my daughters when they were, going through exams, in the sixth form. Really calming, but also helps them focus. Curcumin, that's a derivative of turmeric, highly anti-inflammatory. It's been found to protect brain cells and enhance memory. I mentioned B vitamins earlier. 5-HTP. This is something that you'll find in a supplement. It's a precursor to serotonin, and it's found that it raises levels of serotonin in the brain, which can improve sleep and mood and anxiety. One little caveat, though, if anyone's on antidepressants, they shouldn't take 5-HTP because it can have a kind of a compounding effect of increasing serotonin. So that's not a good idea. But with the doctor's support, it can be kind of beneficial if someone's trying to wean themselves off of long-term SSRI prescriptions. Fish oil, I mentioned, the brain is mostly fat. Quality is super important, right? In fact, across all supplements, you get what you pay for, all right? And so when it comes to a nutritional supplement, fork out, because you'll get a higher quality product. And it's particularly important with fish oil that it's checked for contaminants and mercury levels. And magnesium is the last mineral. Magnesium is nature's relax mineral. And when we're anxious, that's a sign of magnesium deficiency. But also when we're stressed out and anxious, we use up a lot more magnesium. And so I have clients that are what I call stress-induced magnesium deficient. Even if their diet contains a lot of it, we can just burn right through it. Same with B vitamins. So if we are living a stressful life, we might want to supplement B complex and magnesium just as a matter of course. And lastly, of course, it's not about nutrition. We got to make sure we stay hydrated. Our brain is mostly water, and toxins can play effect on brain function. We know exercise boosts mood. Sleep is critical to a functioning brain. Managing our stress levels, all of these things are important. But I guess if I could just leave you with one thing, and everything that I said today went kind of out the window, it would be this one little statement here. Eat real food, not too much, mostly plants, and you'll probably be just fine. So with that, I will say thank you for your attention. And Richard, if it's okay, I'll open it to more questions if people have the time.
There's two here. Well, we've got 3 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is say, if anyone needs to get to the next call, we completely understand. Leave us some feedback in the chat. Mike, if you've got 5 minutes, I'm going to pass on these two questions now.
Yes.
And then understandably, if people have to leave, they will. So you might have answered this actually, but to an extent. But Heidi was saying, what's your view of omega-3 and 6 supplements, and also amino added and protein powder?
Yes. So I'm all for it. Quality matters. Especially with hormone balance. You find some of these supplements that contain things like evening primrose oil. That's an omega-6 oil. Borage oil, high in omega-6. There needs to be balance. This is the thing. That's the most important thing. We want to, if we're going to choose a supplement, I mean, you can test your omega-3 and 6 levels with a blood test. And find out kind of where you need to be. But in the absence of that, go for balance. And if you just need to assume something, assume that we've got too much omega-6 in our diet and supplement omega-3 if you're just going to take one, because that's usually more of because of how we eat today.
Great stuff.
A lot of VFA symptoms mirror menopausal symptoms. Absolutely, there's a relationship with hormone changes. So sometimes when we get that balance right, the hormone symptoms resolve. So were those symptoms hormone symptoms, or were they fatty acid imbalance? You tell me, right? Protein powder can be very vital to top up the diet with protein. We need a lot of protein. We're not getting enough these days. It matters, right? Find a protein powder that just has that protein. If it's got a million ingredients and a bunch of flavorings and sorbitol and this and that, think twice. If you're buying a whey protein, the ingredient should be 100% whey protein if it's organic, and use fruits and other things to add the flavor if you're adding it to a hemp protein is really good as a vegan source, but again, it should say 100% hemp protein. All the, my stepdaughter has these protein powders that are just like chocolate and vanilla and strawberry. Just look at the ingredients. If it doesn't look like food, it's not food.
That seems a good summary, Mike. Mike, that was an absolutely 100% quality grass-fed information supplement to my life, certainly I'm sure to others. Thank you so much for doing it. It was absolutely fantastic. I'm going to hit stop and record. We shall send out the slides shortly along with the recording. Mike, thank you ever so much. Please do have a look at the feedback. Stay on the call if you will, and just sweep that up because you've earned it.